Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 19 of Rocket Lab Weekly. Cannot believe it's been 19 freaking weeks, and Matt is practically a co-host at this point. Really appreciate him, and Dave is a very frequent guest. We really appreciate him also. So welcome, you guys.
No problem. Can't believe it's almost 20 already.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's
pretty wild.
Closing in on half a year. So Rocket Lab has had a very intense week, and I think that the space industry itself has had a very intense week with a lot of things that have happened. So I was thinking we can go through the Rocket Lab events. Obviously, one of the most important one is they closed the 355 million financing. I'm actually really interested to hear your viewpoints because it was super technical how they have done it. And in essence, they bought a $50 million call option on their own stock, which is wild. I thought I was wild with options, and they're going 50 million into call options. And at the end of the episode, we can take like other space industry related things. So let me just share my screen with the correct one.
Oh, there we go. I wasn't looking at the comments.
So here we go. So guys, this is when this financing was announced, the stock fell 20%, which I think was a major overreaction. They ended up being oversubscribed to this deal. They closed it it was announced, I believe, on Thursday night, and the deal was closed on Tuesday morning. I don't know if it means that they just signed contracts or the money is already in the bank at Rocket Lab. And you can see it's a 43.2 million capped call. Like that's how much they paid in essence for buying call options on Palantir to stop
Rocket Lab.
Rocket Lab, I'm sorry. That's in order to stop or like have a higher dilution threshold. So I want to hear your thoughts, guys. I don't know who of you want to go first of the deal, what it makes to the stock. Are we better off or worse off as shareholders that this has happened? And any thoughts that you guys have?
Well, I guess I would just say, first of all, I fully admit I have zero experience with these capped call transactions before this. And as it came out, I was trying to figure out what it was. So I'm not claiming that I'm a complete expert on capped calls, but I'm sure they wouldn't have done it unless they thought it was more beneficial to the shareholders. I think they said they tried to structure it in the most beneficial way. And I think this chart was super helpful. When I saw that, it kind of makes sense. So obviously, like, as the share price goes higher, you as a shareholder, probably care less about getting diluted a bit because you've already got all these gains. Whereas if the share price was still at, say, $7, that's when you don't want to have a ton of dilution for yourself. So that's kind of how I read it.
Yeah, I will agree. I didn't have any experience with cap calls kind of before this. And I think the thing I believe, and this is me just speculating, as we always tend to do on Rocket Lab Weekly, but I think that there was strategic intent behind obviously giving the preliminary 4Q results. And at the same time, kind of issuing this 300, which is now oversubscribed to $355 million convertible note transaction. And I anticipate the reason why they did that is at the same time is to give the opportunity on February 28th, when we have the earnings call, to explain a little bit more as to what this potentially might be used for, or announce some further step that this money will be used for. And I think, as you can see in the last line of the first paragraph there, is my kind of thought process behind, where this capital might be going, which is deploying the capital efficiently and expediently towards a mixture of opportunities, including potential M&A and other strategic growth and scaling investments. And so my thought process is instead of bogging ourselves down talking about numbers, which pretty much came in with respect to what we thought they would with the respect of -1 launch, as we kind of alluded to, GAAP margins kind of came in as expected. Non-GAAP margins kind of came in as expected on the higher end of the range. And then you just lost $7-8 million associated with not having that additional launch in December like we were hoping for. Let's sit around for 45 minutes and talk about how the hell we can take the next step. And, the thing that I've always kind of been surprised by is when something like this happens, initially my reaction is, oh my God, what does this mean for me as a shareholder? That happened when we started to deploy capital into other space systems. And I was like, why are we investing in space systems? We're a launch company, right? And now I'm starting to recognize is these guys, meaning Peter and Spice, actually know what the hell they're doing, and they're actually building a company that differentiates itself from Astra, SpaceX, and a lot of these other companies that are out there. And so I personally don't think that they needed to go into the coffers. These guys had a better financial frame than I think a lot of the other players out there, maybe second to SpaceX or ULA, because they're backed by bigger players. But at the end of the day, even with the most recent transaction they had with Hercules Capital, they still had over $200 million of runway, which gave them multiple months or quarters actually of future runway without having to do a transaction like this. So to me, I think it's strategic, and I think it'll all make sense in the coming quarters.
Yeah, we shall figure out. I agree
personally, personally, I've always felt like I don't want to see another acquisition until they have at least a profitable quarter. But I seem to be in the minority on that. Everyone else seems to be, very much excited about wondering what the next acquisition could be. So
I share that sentiment with you as well, Dave. But
yeah,
my thinking is at the same time, these guys know better about the business than we do.
Right.
Unfortunately, I wish I was sitting in the boardroom having that conversation with them so they could educate me in real time. But I'm with you 100%. It kind of scares me. I thought we were going around quarter by quarter, slowly getting closer and closer to EBITDA break even. And here we are potentially putting ourselves out to a mid 25 or maybe even early 26 with this dilution of picking up another company. But there are some companies out there that are smaller than us, 100, 150 million, that are actually EBITDA positive and actually generate positive cash flow. So I'd be curious to see. I know a lot of people want Raycon, but I think that capital or the spend might be too big. But there are a lot of $50 to $100 million companies that could be very beneficial and bolt on for us that would actually help us from an EBITDA perspective.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think similar to you guys, like it depends on the acquisition, what it is. And I think Raycon would be devastating for me as a shareholder because it would basically almost make Rocket Lab, like they just raise capital, they buy Raycon and they're almost out of cash straight away, because it's such a big acquisition.
Yeah,
but,
I felt like they were too big.
Yeah. But I think that there can be really good acquisitions where, if they're EBITDA positive, then they basically just add to, because if the space sector is very suppressed right now because of the rates or whatever, like it can be that maybe they can buy something small for, a 10 PE or an 8 PE that, is a really good deal. So we shall see. I wanted to ask you guys' opinion on something. So I did a little bit of calculation of how much dilution we get depending on the share price, because currently we have 486 million shares. And if we hit the $9 and they issue 7.4 million, that would be a 1.52% dilution. And then if we hit the $10, it would be 2.79. If we hit the 11, 3.82. And if we hit the worst one, $12, it would be a 4.71% dilution. But here is where I want to know your opinion, because the way I understand it is you have this asterisk, or net shares issuable upon conversion, and then it says that it assumes that Rocket Lab settles the principal amount of notes in cash. So the way that I understand it is, if let's say they were to issue the 7.4 million shares, and I just take a calculator at $9, that's only $66 million. And the way I understand it is they would still have to pay back the 355 million, so that disappears from your bank account. And then on top of it, as a bonus, the one who gave them the convertible loan gets 66 million in shares. And I was really thinking, do I misunderstand it? But even if we go to the $12 and you go 22,900,000 times $12, it's still only 274 million, which is not even enough to cover the loan. So do you guys think I understand this correctly, or is this, because it sounds like an insanely good deal for the one who gave the loan, if the stock price does go up to $12 and they get paid the 355 million back, and on top of it they get 275 million worth in shares.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a good deal. Again, I don't know. I looked at this deal and then I started to go down a rabbit hole a little bit, and then I just thought, like, do I really need to dive deep into the weeds on this one? And I didn't. But that's kind of how I understand it, with that little asterisk at the bottom. So I guess it's, interest and all the rest. Maybe Matt knows no more.
No, I mean, I don't know much more. I mean, they are still getting 6.5% per year, right? And
Yeah.
I think the thing that they're expecting
4.5, I think it's 4.25.
I think you might be right, actually. Yeah, I think it was in the fours.
Was it in the fours?
Yeah, it's really good interest rate.
It was a pretty good interest rate.
All right. Well, I'm wrong there then. I think maybe I was looking at something else, but regardless, it's like they're not getting it for absolute free. But yeah, I think the upside benefit is I'm trying to think. I mean, it's not like that they are not gonna get their cash, right? They are going to get their cash regardless. I think it's just the fact that they used a $40 million covered call to offset it, right? And so it's not to say that they're not going to get the additional capital, right? They'll have to get their money back, and then Rocket Lab then used a financial derivative to be able to offset any sort of convertible note to it. So even in the case where they don't accept it in cash, or some part of it in cash, I think that's part of the derivative that we're probably all confused about, because it is not like a typical call option, right? It's something that probably has to be done, in a private sector where somebody's basically taking the capital up front and basically finding an opportunity in the back end. So, yeah, I don't know. I never really thought beyond much about what it was. I mean, I'm fairly confident that it'll end up being a-okay, but I am really curious. I'm just hoping that they give a lot of color as to what it is on the 28th.
I mean, you say it's a good deal, Vince, but theoretically, let's say the people funding this were giving it to like an Astra instead of a Rocket Lab. Like they'd be taking on huge risk there. So they're, making their own bets, if you will, I suppose.
Yeah. Okay. And then another question. So when I looked at this calculation, that in 2027, so Rocket Lab, based on this, is thinking that they, with no problem, can pay back a loan on 355 million. That must be that management has quite some trust that they will be cash flow positive, and very nicely cash flow positive, to be able to pay this loan back, or they're thinking about another raise or something else. But I did kind of have this idea that also the bankers, they must have been presented, with cash flow numbers that support that this loan can be paid back. So what I want to check, because this capped call, as you guys said, it's so foreign, and so I only found one other company that has done it, and that's Uber, and
really?
it worked. Yeah, and it worked out really well for them apparently. And somebody suggested, because I kept asking, where can I find more data about it, and somebody suggested to me, like, speak to ChatGPT and ask, like, explain capped calls, because I couldn't find anything even if I Googled it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was ChatGPT, like, it explains, like, step by step how you do this thing. It's still not as clear as I would like it, but the reason why I'm asking all these questions, because I want to make sure that I'm not, like, making up stuff, and yeah, we're on the same page, because it's kind of important.
Take the convertible part out of it, right? A normal bond would say $355 million worth of bonds would say, if you default on this and you don't have the capital, then we have the ability to screw the shareholders left and right and be able to dissect your company until we get our $355 million back, right? So that's before any sort of convertible opportunity. So if you think about it, this makes it, I mean, these guys that have the $355 million, convertible debt, yes, they might have upside in shares and stuff like that, but they're ahead of us in the sense of any sort of bankruptcy or anything like that, right? So they obviously see that with the assets that are on the books, that the warehouses, the IP, all this stuff, they'll be able to take on at least part of it, if not all of it. I'm not exactly sure how much we have in assets on the books, but I think we have way more than 355 million. And at the moment, these guys are really the only debt holders other than Hercules Capital, right? So if you think about it in that perspective, we're not very debt ridden as an organization, meaning Rocket Lab. And so at the moment, I think it's a very safe assumption that they're at least going to get their 355 million back, and they're at least going to get the interest rate on a semi-annual basis, and there's upside potential. So the opportunity here, I think, for them is pretty favorable. And I think another piece that wasn't necessarily shared on there, $12 by 2027 is actually pretty light, if you ask me. I honestly think we'll be way above $12. And so they might end up with more shares of the organization than kind of was provided on that chart. But either way, I think it's better than what people were initially kind of thinking, which was, oh, they're immediately going to get 65 million shares of the organization, and we're going to dilute everybody by 15%, which is why the stock overreacted by selling off by 25%, right? And so you at least get a little bit of love with respect to this $40 cap call or $40 million cap call that they're kind of putting in to the market to be able to offset it. So, just to provide some color, it's not like that they.
Yeah, I see what you mean, that they didn't take all that big risk.
Versus Astra, they don't have a flight capable rocket. At the moment, the Astra 4 rocket is kind of just sitting there being like, it's a showpiece. They show it around in all their presentations, but they haven't actually tried to fly it. They have a facility that is actually pretty high tech, but at the end of the day, if that facility doesn't actually make any usable rockets at the moment, it's kind of like a head scratcher. So versus us, we have 43 rockets that have launched, some successfully, some not, but the majority of them have been. And we have successful solar panels and Photon and all these other space systems that are generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year, as displayed in fiscal year 2023. So I think it's a pretty safe bet for them in the meantime. And I think that's bullish for them to potentially get this upside opportunity and own pretty much 4 or 5% of the company, likely, after they're all said and done with it. And in the meantime, get a 4.25% interest rate.
And by the way, I think it taps out at $12, because you said that it goes higher after $12. I think that's part of the upside, quote unquote, that if the stock is $18, then they still get issued this many shares at $12. So then they automatically also win it's like a call option.
Okay, no, that's good feedback.
At least
I haven't read through all of it,
at least that's how. I mean, because it wouldn't make sense that if the stock is like, $22, then they dilute us, 15%.
Yeah, clearly on forever.
Yeah. All right, and now the last question on this topic, and then we fully close it out. So, do you guys think that the drop was deserved? And is the company now, because in my opinion, the company now is better than what it was before. So we started at $5, and this deal came in, and I think that the stock is worth way more than $5 because a lot of cash risk has gone away. They got quite a good deal. We are not very being diluted. They have a lot more options to do things. So I would expect the stock to rebound and go higher from here. But I want to hear your viewpoints.
I mean, you can't argue that it's the company's in a better place with the extra 300 million in the bank. I guess the question is like, with the dilution, how much is that worth? So I think it was overblown. Maybe it deserved a little bit of a downturn, but not like 20-25% like it did. And I would expect it to continue to rebound, I think.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. Sorry, Dave, were you done? I didn't mean to cut you off. Oh, okay. I also think it was overdone. It's hard to say whether or not the company is better off at the moment. I think from a financial standpoint and runway, yes. I mean, you don't worry about capitalizing the organization for many, many, many moons. My curiosity, though, is what they're going to use the capital funds for. So it's hard to say at the moment without knowing what the funds will be used for. Is it prudent to, or is the company better off? I thought we were perfectly okay, before this convertible note payment, right? And I'm not saying it's good or bad, right? I'm just saying it's too early to tell. And I think that more things will come to light over the coming 3 weeks once we have the earnings call at the end of the month. But for me, the company was sufficient with the Hercules capital, right? I think that they were able to provide themselves a little bit of a runway to get to Neutron at that point. And you have to think, yeah, you might have to fund 1 or 2 Neutrons, but contracts are going to start coming in, and they're going to be able to do pretty well with that. I think Neutron's probably going to cost 35 to 40 million the first 1 or 2, and then once they get in the groove of things, it'll drop it down to 25 million, 30 million, and eventually in the long term, I'm sure they'll get it down to 20, 25 million because they're anticipating getting a 50% gross margin on it, right? So I think you had capital after the Hercules capital financing deal to kind of get you through that point where you needed to be. But my thought process is we're going to have a lot of good news, and hopefully I'm not humbled at the end of the month. I think we're going to have a lot of good news with respect to what's going on with Neutron in this particular earnings call. And I think we're going to hear rumblings about what's next because it's inevitable if things go well this quarter and they are willing to give us so much detail about what's going on with Neutron, then it's inevitable that the Neutron's going to be launched in say the next 12 to 18 months, and you're going to start getting contracts in. And then after that, we're going to be sitting here being like, okay, cool, we're the obvious number 2 in this space behind SpaceX, and it is now evident that we are better than ULA from a execution perspective. What is next? And I think you have this competition of SpaceX is now getting into the International Space System business and being able to launch that potentially wholly with the Starship. Like what exactly is going to be the Starlink for Rocket Lab, or are we just going to be a conglomerate of really good space systems businesses that are able to be end to end? Who knows? And that's what I expect to get a little bit more color on. But maybe I'm expecting too much out of a 45-minute call towards the end of the month.
As long as it's not like a PayPal call, we will be good.
A what call?
PayPal.
Well, I think that's why they're not saying, "Oh my God, be surprised what we're going to do with this $300 million."
Exactly.
More to come at the end of this month.
Yeah. So, and on this note, on this Neutron note, I'm sure you guys have seen this tweet by Rocket Lab that they were actually testing I call it the heat shield. They call it the neutron thermal protection system on Electron. And I thought this was genius, that they're already testing different parts of the rocket. So what do you guys think about Neutron? Are we on time? I see a lot of people freaking out online about Neutron not being done on time. And yet every time Peter Beck has an interview or is asked about it, he's like, no, we're very, very good with Neutron. And they even started pouring concrete in Virginia. I'm not sure if that was just for show for this 355 million financing, because they needed to prove how good they were. But if we take Peter at face value, the fact that they started the concrete, it's a very, very good sign for Neutron. So Dave, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you know what? I think the thermal protection system looks good. Obviously, this is a big advantage they have over some others, where when you already have a rocket flying, you can do things like this and test parts for the upcoming Neutron, and obviously use some systems, kind of directly port them over to Neutron from Electron. But I'm still in the boat where, I want to see Archimedes firing. It's great that they are pouring concrete and getting going in the launch site, and I've never really had any lack of confidence on the tanks and the structures and the carbon composites. But yeah, for me, if we get footage of an Archimedes firing in the earnings call, that would be what would make me the most happy personally.
Yeah, I think the thing that I want to go back in personally, because the way I always interpreted it was we were going to have a launch by December 2024, early 2025, right? And now I've started to see the verbiage come out, and I would love people to fact check me. That's how I perceived it, that you'd have Neutron on the pad by, December 2024, meaning it would launch in December 2024, or at least before 2025. Now I'm starting to see, well, they never said it was going to launch. It was just going to be on the pad. And so I'd love to see a little bit more color around like what was actually announced. And if there's a little bit of backtracking and actual select choice of words to see if that means delays. And I just don't know. I haven't dug into like the actual announcements and listened and wrote down the actual transcripts as to comparing, what's being said now versus what was being said back then, to see if there's true, I guess, change of verbiage. But I'm still confident that we're 6 months delay is on track for me in this industry. I work in oil and gas where things are delayed pretty much all the time as well. So it's always kind of curious when you have some of these engineering schedules. You always have something that's called like a performance target, and then you have something that's called like a control target. So like the performance target is like, we want to get to, this is what we're planning for, trying to get everything out in time. And so sometimes when people give you a date, they give you the performance target and they'll give you the control target. The control target is like, okay, this is where we think things will actually end up. But the performance target is like trying to make sure everything stacks together as appropriate as possible. So it all depends. I mean, sometimes depending on how big of a project it is, and hell, when you're launching a rocket into space, it's not very easy. I wouldn't be surprised if the PT versus the CT is a difference of a year. So I don't necessarily know. I think it would be probably faux pas whatever the word is, bad manners for a Peter or a Spice to be giving out the performance target, right? To people. I think it'd be more likely that they would give out a more than likely target for them. But I see a lot of other companies that give out their performance targets, like, we're going to get it done in the next 6 days. And it's like, well, in reality, they're getting it done, 3 weeks, 4 months, 8 years down the road. Not calling out Tesla, but full self-driving, that sort of thing. That's what I'm kind of referring to, right? So but it's literally space, it's literally rocket science, right? So I would love to hear a little bit more color, and maybe you guys have done more fact checking.
So you're saying they're tricking us with the words, and they're going to have like a Neutron tank, some engines lying around, some first stage, and then they're like, yeah, Neutron is on the pad, it's just not in one piece.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I don't think that they would play some trickery. I don't think that that's like Peter and Spice as well.
Yeah.
I don't think they would be like, hey, look, we told you we'd get it. I think when they say, even if they said we'll have a Neutron rocket on the pad by December, even if they didn't mean we'll launch it by December 2024, they definitely will have meant a completed rocket, right? Not something that is like not flight ready, right?
Yeah.
Here's a question for you, because we're talking about the rocket industry, and delays are like not unexpected. How much of a delay would it have to be on Neutron before you would say, like, okay, this is a major problem for the company? Like, is 6 months is probably okay? Like, is a year like a huge problem?
For me, 2025, like if they don't manage to launch Neutron in 2025, it's kind of a problem for me.
So that'd be like anything over a 1 year delay from what we were originally told, basically.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think that's pretty fair. Yeah.
I'm used to big projects, $1 billion projects coming in a little bit behind.
Yeah, I guess it can happen. All right, the next news is that we have the new launch announced, and it looks like it's funny here. It says ready for launch on February 18th, and this is basically retweeting what Astroscale has tweeted. But in Rocket Lab's own announcement, they're saying the launch window opens on the 19th of February. So I don't know if they miscommunicated, or I don't know what happened there.
Well, you have to have the
even be a
rocket
time
ready for
zone
launch,
thing,
right?
Sorry?
You have to have the rocket ready for launch, right? So technically, I'm just playing a joke.
Yeah. But it seems like we are on track, as because it was, what was it, last week or two weeks ago, when we compared NASA's permissions for flights, and it looked like there was going to be 2 launches for Electron in February, 2 in March, and this is right sort of in the middle of February. And then if we get a new one in 10 days, then we will have 3 this year. And then we only need to launch 2 in March, and then we are good to keep our target.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say in general, like, we want to see one roughly every 2 weeks. So it's good to hear, but still definitely was a slow start to the year for launch.
Definitely. So now I want to show another story that is non-Rocket Lab related, but it somehow circles back to Rocket Lab. And Dave, I saw you made a video about this. Sierra Space eyes an IPO. And what's really interesting for me about this is I'm not super, I believe, Dave, you know more about this company. But what's super interesting to me is they don't have launch capability. So they're more like a space systems company. They are building this Dream Chaser plane, which, as far as I understand, it goes into a second stage. You can shoot it up. I think they're currently planning to shoot it up on the Vulcan's next launch. And it can supply stuff to the International Space Station, and then basically come back as a space plane. And then they also won a contract from the SDA, the same organization that awarded Rocket Lab the $565 million contract, but they got even more than Rocket Lab. And then they have another mission of building commercial space stations in connection with Blue Origin. And this company is supposedly valued at $5 billion. And again, I can't help to think that, okay, maybe they are egregiously overvalued and Rocket Lab is egregiously undervalued, or maybe, this is, or maybe both is true at the same time. So I want to hear your take on this, what you think about this. And
I mean, I've thought they're like a super cool, interesting company for a long time. When they didn't get selected as like a crew version of their Dream Chaser, and they lost out to Dragon and Boeing Starliner. A lot of people thought it'd be the end, but they've continued on with their vehicle. I can't really say if they're overvalued or undervalued till I see some like revenue numbers and projections. Obviously, I think they're getting like something like 700 million from the SDA, so that's pretty big for building out satellites. And I don't know what other customers they have on that side of things or how big of a business that is. And yeah, I mean, they have some interesting agreements in place with I don't know if this space station with Blue Origin is going to end up getting built or not, the orbital reef, but they talked about using it on that. It'd be interesting to see like if this could fit inside on top of a Neutron even. I don't know. I think
I had that thought also.
Yeah. Like right now, I think it's Vulcan, but I think they kind of designed it to be launch vehicle agnostic. So it could go on multiple vehicles, and they don't have any plans of going into launch, but could be an interesting one for the space industry because so many companies that came public were like so speculative, no revenues or anything. And at least it seems more solid to me.
Yeah, I think I don't know much about the organization, so it's hard for me to determine what their capability is or anything of the like. So we always see some of these contracts come out, like Global Star, for example, won the Apple contract, but then they asked MDA to help fulfill the contract. Then the MDA subcontracted it out to Rocket Lab, right? So it could be the same sort of thing where they won a $700 million contract, but they subcontract out to somebody that has the capability. So there's always that possibility. I don't know, right? But that's just, just to give people some color as to what sometimes goes on, right? When you hear Apple giving out the Global Star contract, it's really Rocket Lab who's actually helping fulfill some of those, if not a majority of those pieces. And it gives me a little pause as well when people always say, oh, it's valued at $4-5 billion. Relativity is also valued pretty substantially high, but we have more capability from a Rocket Lab perspective in terms of being able to launch rockets, being able to provide space systems, but yet here we are valued at $2 billion. And so I think it's pretty interesting in that respect. But I agree with Dave. It's hard to say $4-5 billion is way too much. I don't know any revenue numbers, right? So it's interesting. If I had some, you might be able to start playing around with some stuff. I mean, the link that you have actually right there to the right, estimating SpaceX's 2023 revenue, I think they're forecasted to come in about 8.7 billion for fiscal year 23. And so if you look at their most recent kind of valuation, they're up to like 150 to 180 billion dollars based off their last capital round. So you're able to kind of put in a price to sales of close to 20x at that point. And so, it's up pretty substantially in terms of the valuation compared to where it was last year. They made about 4.6 or so billion, and they were getting about $150 billion valuations towards the middle of 2023. So if you think about it in that perspective, you're getting price to sales of 30. Rocket Lab, on the other hand, is sitting around a price to sales of less than 10. And so if you think about it in that perspective, I think that Rocket Lab is undervalued by, pretty substantial margin, at least 50 to 100% undervalued compared to at least the number one opportunity on the market that is unfortunately private, so people can't invest in it. So like Dave said, without actual concrete valuations or numbers kind of coming through, it's kind of difficult. And as we've already seen, just because they won a $700 million contract doesn't mean that's not spread out over the course of, say, 3, 4, 5 years. And so it could mean that they're making 100 million a year, 200 million a year, 300 million a year. We don't really know until we get a little bit more details of the contract.
From the outside, like just from the little I know of the company, I do feel like they shouldn't be worth, more than twice of what a Rocket Lab is, just kind of from what I know of what they do. But yeah, I don't want to say if there could be manufacturing satellites out there that I'm unaware of. So
yeah, yes, we don't have the numbers, but basically the 3 areas that was in this newspaper article, it was that this Dream Chaser is going to resupply the ISS, right? And the International Space Station is going to deorbit in like 2-3 years. And then the article says that what happens after is not very clear like what is the market for this dream chaser. Then they have this SDA contract that's very, very legit, and they have that one. And then the third thing is their agreement with Amazon, or sorry, Blue Origin, and that one is in question. So like it feels like out of the 3 legs that they're standing on, like 2 is sort of up in the air. So it's only like the satellites, but it's true, like we don't have the numbers, but my gut feeling is also that it's crazy overvalued.
I mean, the ISS should last a while longer than that, but eventually they do need a plan to have a use for it beyond ISS, and we do need some commercial space stations.
Isn't it 2027 when they're planning to deorbit it? Or
I think now we're looking at 2030s, if I heard correctly.
Really?
Originally,
I thought it did get extended.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it got extended, but
okay.
It can only last so long. So.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. This was all the topics that I had for today. I don't know if you guys have any, because there was really a lot of space news this week, but it was a lot of companies. But before we go there, we got an interesting comment here from Johnny Mac. Would love to hear each of your ends 2024 price targets for Rocket Lab. And I'm always wrong on these, so it feels like anytime somebody asks me this, it's like, please shoot yourself in the foot.
That's kind of what I was thinking. Yeah.
But we can just play it as a game. Like, what do you guys think?
Sure. So operating under the theory that Neutron does not launch in this year, Electron goes pretty well. Space Systems goes pretty well. Yeah, I mean, it's impossible. Maybe $8. $7.50 to $8.
Amen.
Yeah, I think, I never invested. I'll just put it a caveat here. I never invested in Rocket Lab for a 2024 or 2025 price target.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. So
for a decade out, something that was closer to 2030, 2035 before I really came back for a breath of air. But I did write a Seeking Alpha article about Rocket Lab. When was that? Sometime middle of last month, and I have a price target for year-end 25 for about 15. And I think the reason being is the revenue that we're kind of expecting in the $650 million range for 2025, I think will be able to be a price of sales there anywhere between 9 to 10. And with that, I think you're going to be able to get to close to a $7 to $8 billion market cap. So in that respect, I think you'll be able to get closer to a $15 price target for that. But I guess if you wanted to roll it back to what we're kind of experiencing here in 2024, it's difficult, right? And I say this to a lot of people that are looking at the company. There's still a lot of capital exposure risk with Rocket Lab, maybe a little bit less now that we have the additional 300 million coming into the coffers. But with that said, I think that there's still Neutron, seeing that through, seeing what the next stages are, and also seeing the increased launch cadence that we're hoping to see this year. And until you see that kind of next 3 things, I don't really think you need an additional kind of leg to stand on. I think that the Space Systems on its own, increased cadence with Electron, and then a successful kind of Neutron testing period is sufficient enough to kind of say, okay, you're kind of over the hump of outrageous capital spend at the moment. But who knows? They might introduce something that kind of obligates the company to think about what is next. And that could be another $200-300 million capital spend that we're not accounting for at the moment. So I think 2024 will be very volatile, but I think $8 is sufficient. But like I said, so I agree with Dave. I think that's not something that's too outrageous, but I think it's also achievable. But for me, when I think about the company, I don't think about the next 6 months to 12 months. I do that because I think a lot of people, unfortunately, do look at the company in that short of a time horizon. But I never invested in companies like Palantir to figure out what it was going to be worth in 2024. I bought it thinking, what is it going to be in 2030? And same thing with Dutch Bros, same thing with Rocket Lab. So it's just not how I evaluate my positions, nor do I evaluate my portfolio on that sort of time horizon. But if you kind of put a gun to my head to provide that, I that's why I provide those kind of lenses of capital exposure risk and stuff like that for 2024. But for me, I mean, if I end up losing what I have, like 9,300 shares or something now, if that all goes to zero, I'm not going to be living under a bridge, but I'll be pretty sad based off the potential, right? I guess it's what, like, I'm not sure, 40 grand or something like that. I don't really know how much it's worth, but I just advise anybody that if you are thinking like that, make sure that you're investing capital that you won't be living under a bridge if it doesn't work out, right? Always make sure you're investing to a point where it's meaningful, but at the same time won't hurt you if unfortunately you lose that capital.
Yeah.
Do you have a prediction, Vince?
Yeah, I mean, so I actually gave it quite some thought that I think catalysts for the stock to go up is if they have any sort of new contract announcement, if Neutron just shows itself to be on time, and them basically just executing, because they gave very, very nice guidance. And Q1 seems to be like we have a shot at having a 100 million quarter. If we don't reach it, it's going to be quite close, and it will be like an 83% increase compared to Q1. And I think that that's going to go over like all of 2024, that it will be a very big increase in revenue. And what's really nice is that it's Space Systems that is driving this, and it's much more plannable. So I think that if they just exit, like even if they don't do 22 launches, they do 18 launches or whatever, the Space Systems part is firing in all cylinders, and that I think is a catalyst. And if these things happen, I do think it's real that we can close out the year between 6 to 8. That would be my guess. But unfortunately, there can be negative catalysts. Maybe Peter could be selling for whatever reason. Maybe some big insider could be selling for whatever reason. Some rockets can explode. We don't have capital raise as a concern, because that would be really weird if they would need to raise capital again this year. I have a hard time to see that the stock would go below 4 again with the current, even if we have rockets exploding and whatever. So I'm in between these two. Like if it goes good for Rocket Lab, 6 to 8. If it's not going good, no lower than 4.
The thing that does upset me a little bit is there's no major shareholder or share structure of the organization that prevents it from being acquired. And so I don't know who would be in the market to purchase a Rocket Lab. And yes, I do believe they would have to pay some sort of premium. But to me, I think the long-term potential on its own as a separate entity would be much better than, say, if they merged with the ULA or something like that. And I don't foresee that happening. But that is something that kind of crosses my mind, is there is no preferred share class, like not preferred share, because that's actually a technical term. There's no like founder share class like we have at Palantir or like Elon wants at Tesla. So for me, I mean, you look at it, it's like, I mean, Peter owns 10% of the company, but that's not sufficient enough to rule out the other 90% of investors if the unfortunate event of, let's just say, 40% of the institutional investors want a quick buyout of, say, $8 billion. So it's kind of tough. And that's something I hope doesn't happen, because like I said, I do think that this company on its own could be a $25 to $50 billion company within the next 10 to 15 years. And so I just hope that we don't get cut short in our dreams, or at least my dream, seeing it live out, because I think Peter's done a phenomenal job since 2006, being able to work his way up to where we were able to go public in 2021. And I anticipate we'll see more of his growth happening through the coming years. And I just hope that that opportunity doesn't get cut short by something silly like people being short-minded, wanting a buyout for a quick 50 to 100% return.
Yeah, I'd be disappointed if that happened, but I don't think it's likely. But I mean, if it does, I guess at least we'll get a premium on the short term.
Yeah, I mean, you can't cry on your way to the bank, right? But at the same time, I feel like it'd be very short-sighted.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but who would benefit from it? Because I feel that Rocket Lab is a very diversified company, and if you look at their divisions, like none of them is too big, you know. Like if you look at the launch side of it, like there is other bigger launch providers like ULA that is for sale, you know. And if you look at like space systems, it does come with the rocket launch section. So I don't know if
is ULA bigger though. They don't do it.
ULA is the speculation was the buying price for them would be around $5 billion.
Yeah, they're bigger in terms of they have a bigger rocket. Like if you would buy Rocket Lab today, and Peter Beck would decide to move to an island with hot chicks and drink mojitos every day, I'm not sure what would happen to Neutron. And ULA, you can I think you can handle like a bigger part of the market.
Yeah, I don't think they would be an acquirer. I mean, they're even looking to get acquired this year, so it would have to be someone more like a Lockheed or another bigger company, I'd say.
And wouldn't also I mean, I agree that there's nothing preventing them from happening, but don't you think that the board still has to vote on this, and it has to be like they can say no, right? Or you think that the institutions would pull out their guns and just make them sign?
I don't know. I mean, they have that duty to the
gets
shareholders, so
Yeah.
I don't know what they would feel their duty is if they get an offer that's like a 50 to 100% premium on the current share price.
Yeah.
I think they can only turn down an offer as if they think it's undervalued compared to what they think the company is worth. But I think if you're trading at a significant premium to current market valuation, say 20, 30% above, I feel like they have a duty to shareholders, unfortunately, to present that to a vote. Now, it could very well be that the rest of the shareholders say, yeah, that 20 to 30% premium isn't sufficient. We feel like within the next several months or years, we'll see much more than that. And we, as shareholders could vote no, but I think if somebody came in and said, we want to pay you $1 billion, I don't think that the board's going to be like, okay, let's put this up to a vote, right? I think if somebody came in at a $5 billion valuation, though, unfortunately, I think we'd be voting whether or not we think it was the right thing to do. So, I think that there is some stipulations, and I think that there's some discretion, but I think it's literally as simple as the monetary piece of it, right?
All right. Well, is there any news you guys think is noteworthy for this week in the space industry? I think we covered Rocket Lab pretty well.
I don't think so.
Yeah. Then I think that this was it for today. We had 80 something, maybe even 90 people at the peak, which is pretty good for this show. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you guys for contributing here. Please make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And in the description box, you find everyone's Twitter and YouTube channel. Please make sure that you follow Dave and Matt Money, and see you guys next week.
I have a quick question before we end.
Yeah.
I know do you guys go on the Reddit at all for Rocket Lab?
Occasionally, not super often, but every now and then I'll check it out.
Yeah, I've noticed that I've recently just started poking in my head at Reddit again, and it might be an opportunity for us to be a little bit more public in there, because it could be a whole community that we aren't accessing. But they seem to be pretty on top. Now that I've in the group, I get the messages, and stuff straight to my phone, and they're generally pretty quick about, you know, getting to news and stuff like that, which helps me because I'm not always on my game looking at the news articles and stuff like that. So it helps out. It helps streamline. Generally, it's people being like, what do you think about X, Y, and Z? But sometimes, 50% of the articles are actual news related articles that are very positive. So I might just post our links in there, and hopefully we can continue to grow the conversation on a weekly basis, or maybe find more people to talk to. It'll always
We'll see.
be.
I mean, sometimes they don't. Yeah, I don't know about how they feel about self promotion, but you can give it a shot.
They could ban me if they want. I'm not going to be too butthurt.
Yeah.
I've never used Reddit, so I'm definitely going to check it out. But
You've missed out so many. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, all right. So we for sure check this out, Matt. So thank you again, everyone. See you guys next week.
Thank
See
you
ya.
all.